Today I'm going to tell you a secret that I never imagined telling anyone. My husband can't know what my neighbor did. My name is Clara, I'm 32 years old and I didn't imagine that moving house would cause all this. When Henry and I decided to leave the city and move to a house in the countryside, we were looking for an escape from the hectic pace of urban life. The idea was to find a space where we could start over and revitalize our relationship, which was beginning to feel the weight of the years and routine. The old house had undeniable charm. With its stone walls and thatched roof, it looked like it had come straight out of a fairy tale. The garden was a true oasis, a vast green space with rare flowers, well-maintained shrubs, and a tranquil pond at the back. I fell in love with the place immediately. I spent hours there, engrossed in gardening, tending to the plants, and pruning the roses with almost religious dedication. Henry, on the other hand, was deeply immersed in his work. While this was understandable, his absence from the garden reflected the growing emotional distance between us. He would come to the garden occasionally, but his visits were brief and disengaged. The country house, which was supposed to bring us closer, was actually creating a subtle but noticeable separation. Our conversations became more formal and rarely went beyond the surface. However, I remained hopeful. I believed the new environment would bring new vigor to our relationship. The tranquility of the countryside seemed to promise a new beginning, but reality soon proved more complicated. One hot, sunny afternoon, while I was busy pruning the roses in the garden, I heard footsteps at the fence. I looked up and saw a tall, charming young man approaching with a friendly smile. It was Peter, the new neighbor who had moved into the house next door. Peter introduced himself in an engaging manner, with a broad smile and a relaxed attitude. He offered to help with the garden, and his offer was received with gratitude. His presence brought an unexpected change to the garden's atmosphere. As we worked together, Peter shared stories about his life, his dreams, and his adventures. It was fascinating to hear someone so young and enthusiastic talk about their experiences and perspectives. Peter's visits became more frequent. He began helping with gardening tasks and spent more time chatting with me. There was a palpable chemistry between us. The way he looked at me, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about his interests, made me feel special. I found myself looking forward to his visits, and each moment with him seemed to bring a freshness that had been missing in my life. That late summer afternoon, the sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over everything. The garden looked especially beautiful, with vibrant flowers and the tranquil pond reflecting the sky. I was busy pruning the roses, a ritual that provided me with a sense of peace and control. However, the tranquility of that moment was about to be interrupted by something I hadn't expected. Peter appeared at the garden fence, as if emerging from a dream. He was casually dressed, in a light linen shirt and jeans. His smile was warm and welcoming, and there was something in his gaze that made my heart race. He had moved into the house next door a few weeks ago, and our meetings had become more frequent, always with him offering help in the garden. That day, Peter brought me a bottle of homemade lemonade, a simple gesture but one that seemed to carry a load of meaning. He handed it to me with a smile, and the way our fingers brushed while taking the bottle sent a shiver through my body. The connection I felt with him was becoming more intense and tangible each day. "I hope it's warm enough for this," Peter commented, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Thank you, Peter. It's very hot today," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and controlled. The desire to get to know him better was undeniable, but I struggled to maintain my composure. Peter sat down on one of the garden benches, and I joined him. We talked about trivial matters initially, but soon the conversation became more personal. Peter spoke with a sincerity and depth that I didn't find in my daily conversations with Henry. We talked about our pasts, dreams, and aspirations. Each word seemed to build an invisible bridge between us. The chemistry between us was undeniable. The way Peter looked at me, with a gaze that seemed to penetrate directly into my soul, was both intriguing and unsettling. I felt alive and appreciated in a way I hadn't felt in years. As the day turned to night, Peter and I continued talking, and the atmosphere around us seemed to become more intimate and cozy. The sky was now filled with stars, and the garden was bathed in a soft, magical light. Peter stood up and walked over to the pond, where the water was sparkling under the starlight. I followed him, and we stood side by side, watching the reflection of the stars in the still water. The closeness between us was electrically charged, and I felt a growing desire to be even closer to him. Peter broke the silence with a comment about how the garden looked magical at night. "Sometimes, I feel like this garden has a special way of revealing people's true feelings," he said, his voice soft and contemplative. I looked at him and, without thinking, said, "You really have a way of seeing things differently. I feel like I can talk to you about things I don't share with anyone else." Peter looked at me with a smile that seemed to hide something deeper. "I feel that too, Clara. There's something special between us, don't you think?" The tension between us was palpable, and I could feel my heart racing. Peter took a step closer, and the energy between us seemed almost visible. He reached out and touched my face with a gentle gesture. The contact of his skin against mine was like a spark, igniting a desire I had tried to control. I leaned in towards him, and our lips met in a soft kiss, but one charged with an intensity that surprised us both. The kiss began with hesitation but soon turned into something deeper and more fervent. I could feel the urgency and passion in every touch, and the world around us seemed to disappear, leaving only the connection between us. That night was a mix of intense and conflicting emotions. Each touch from Peter, each kiss, seemed to rekindle a part of me that had been dormant. However, there was also a growing awareness of the betrayal I was committing, a struggle between desire and guilt that consumed me. Peter and I spent the night together, and time seemed to stretch, making each moment even more significant. The intimacy we shared was an expression of a repressed desire, something I hadn't known I needed until Peter showed me. When morning came, I was filled with a mix of emotions. The night with Peter had been both exhilarating and painful. I knew I had crossed a line, but the intensity of what we shared left a deep mark. The passion and connection were real, but I also had to face the consequences of my actions. Peter and I parted with a silent understanding that what we had experienced was more than just a moment of passion. It was an experience that would shape our lives in ways we didn't yet fully understand. The next evening, Peter and I were alone at his house. The space was softly illuminated by candles, creating an intimate and relaxing atmosphere. I found myself nervous, but the anticipation was mixed with an excitement I couldn't ignore. The wine had been served, and as we talked, the conversation grew increasingly personal and engaging. The space was enveloped in a sense of ease. Peter offered me a glass of wine, and as I held it, our fingers touched briefly. The lightness of the touch was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Peter smiled at me, a smile that seemed to carry a hidden meaning. He had invited me to his home, but the invitation now felt like it had an unspoken subtext I couldn't ignore. We talked about our pasts, dreams, and hopes. The closeness between us was palpable, and the conversation was intense and deep. Peter seemed to have a special ability to touch on the most intimate parts of my life, something Henry, with his tiring and distant routine, had stopped doing. There was an emotional and intellectual connection I felt with Peter, something that made me feel alive and appreciated. Our gazes met with an intensity that made my heart race. The wine was beginning to take effect, and the atmosphere was charged with a subtle sexual tension. Peter began to speak in a softer tone, and I noticed our bodies were closer than before. The conversation became a low and intimate murmur, and the room seemed to revolve around us. Peter slowly moved closer, and his touch on my hand was gentle and assured. He looked into my eyes, and for a moment, the world around us disappeared. I felt a wave of desire growing inside me, something that had been repressed for so long. Peter touched my face with his fingertips, his touches gentle and tender. With a soft gesture, Peter leaned in, and his lips met mine. The kiss started out tentative, but soon turned into something more intense. I responded with a passion that seemed to have been dormant for years. Our lips moved in perfect harmony, and the feeling of being desired and appreciated made the desire overwhelming. Peter pulled me closer, and I felt the warmth of his body against mine. He wrapped me in his arms, and I lost myself in the sensation of his touch. Peter's hands explored my body with a mix of urgency and tenderness. Each touch was like a spark, rekindling the passion I had long buried. The intensity of the moment grew as our bodies moved in a synchronized rhythm. The desire between us was almost palpable, and each touch and kiss was loaded with profound meaning. I felt completely immersed, both physically and emotionally. It was as if we were in a separate universe where nothing else mattered. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless and immersed in a sense of exhaustion and satisfaction. The passion we shared was a moment of pure connection, something that left a deep mark on both of us. However, at the same time, I knew the experience was laden with guilt and regret. I had crossed a line, and the weight of that knowledge was almost unbearable. Peter and I looked at each other, and there was a mutual understanding that what had just happened would change everything. The intensity of the moment had created a deep bond but also brought to light a series of issues that needed to be faced. The desire and attraction we felt for each other were undeniable, but they were also accompanied by an emotional complexity that couldn't be ignored. I woke up that morning with a heavy weight on my shoulders. The morning sun filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting a soft glow over the bed where Peter and I had spent the night. The euphoria of the previous night had been replaced by a thick cloud of guilt and regret. What I had done seemed like a colossal mistake, something I couldn't ignore or simply forget. Peter was still asleep beside me, and I got up carefully not to wake him. The room was silent except for the soft sound of his breathing. I looked at him, and the feeling of betrayal seemed more intense as I saw his peaceful and relaxed face. The night we had shared was intense and full of desire, but now I faced the harsh reality of the consequences. I went downstairs, trying to organize my thoughts and prepare for what was to come. The house was silent, which contrasted with the turmoil I felt inside. Henry wasn't home yet, and the thought of how I would face the situation consumed me. The fear of how he would react and the weight of the guilt from betraying his trust were suffocating. I decided to spend some time in the garden, a place that had always brought me calm. However, today, the garden seemed to reflect my disturbed state of mind. The flowers were radiant, and the pond was tranquil, but I was in an internal storm. I sat on a bench near the roses, where I had spent so many hours tending to the plants. The smell of the flowers was familiar and comforting, but it couldn't dispel the cloud of guilt hanging over me. My hands trembled as I reflected on the night with Peter. The connection we felt was real and powerful, but I knew I needed to face the consequences of that decision. Henry deserved to know the truth, and I could no longer live with the weight of the secret. The clock in the kitchen indicated that it was time for Henry to come home. My heart raced as I imagined the conversation we would have. I knew it would be painful and difficult, but I also knew it was the only way to deal with the situation honestly. When Henry arrived, he looked exhausted, but his calm demeanor did nothing to ease my nerves. The first thing I did was prepare him for a serious conversation. Dinner was ready, but I invited him to the living room. I sat with him, trying to find the right words. Henry was aware that something was wrong, and his concern was palpable. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice trembling. "Henry, there's something important I need to tell you," I started. What happened was a hasty decision, and I don't know how to put into words the depth of my regret. Henry looked at me with a mix of surprise and sadness. I continued, revealing the betrayal and the relationship I had with Peter. I spoke with sincerity and desperation, trying to explain the complexity of my feelings and the reasons behind my actions. Each word seemed to carry the weight of a ton, and I saw the pain reflected in Henry's eyes. He remained silent for a long time after I finished speaking. His expression was a mix of shock and sadness, and I knew he was processing the gravity of the situation. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but laden with pain. "Clara, I am deeply hurt. But more than that, I am disappointed because you didn't share your feelings with me before making such a drastic decision." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult I've ever had. Henry and I discussed the reasons behind the betrayal and the underlying issues in our relationship. He expressed his frustration and sadness, and I tried to explain the breakdowns in our communication and the emotional disconnect I felt. The pain was palpable, but there was also a genuine desire to understand and rebuild what we had lost. When the conversation ended, we were both emotionally exhausted, but there was an emerging understanding that, although the road ahead would be tough, it was possible to find a way forward. Henry expressed a desire to seek help for our relationship and work together to overcome this crisis. His maturity and willingness to face the situation with honesty surprised me and gave me hope. I knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but the decision to face the truth and seek healing was a crucial step. Henry and I decided to pursue couples therapy to better understand our emotions and strengthen our relationship. The journey would be long and difficult, but at least now we were starting to confront the truth and work together to rebuild what had been broken. Peter, in turn, understood the gravity of the situation and chose to step back. His decision to withdraw was a gesture of respect for my situation and an opportunity for all of us to reflect on our own feelings and needs. The garden, which had been the setting for so many intense emotions, now became a symbol of our journey toward healing and renewal. I hoped that, with time, we could find a new way to relate to each other and overcome the difficulties we faced. The experience was a painful lesson but also an opportunity to grow and better understand the complexity of relationships and the importance of communication and honesty. Henry and I began a process of healing and reflection with the help of a couples therapist. The sessions were intense and often painful. We opened our lives and feelings in ways we had never done before. Each session revealed more about ourselves and the challenges we faced. During this period, Peter decided to step back. He understood the need to give the couple space so we could work on our relationship without the interference of a third party. Peter's decision was a gesture of respect and understanding, and also served as a moment of reflection for him. He withdrew to deal with his own issues and to reflect on the impact his actions had on our lives. The healing process was long and difficult. But along the way, Henry and I began to rebuild our connection. We learned to communicate more openly and honestly. We started to better understand our emotional needs and work together to meet them. The garden, which had been a scene of passion and conflict, became a symbol of transformation and growth. The experience taught us the importance of communication and honesty in a relationship. Henry and I began to rediscover what it meant to be truly connected. We worked to create a healthier and more conscious relationship. The process was challenging, but the dedication and effort were worth it. We learned to value our time together and to express our emotions more openly. The garden flourished as a reflection of our new beginning, and the rare flowers and tranquil lake became symbols of our renewal. Peter, for his part, moved forward with a new perspective on desire and relationships. He had learned important lessons about the challenges and consequences of his actions. Although the romance between us had ended, the experience was a starting point for personal growth and reflection. Months later, as we continued to work on our relationship, Henry made an unexpected discovery. While organizing one of the old boxes, he found a diary of mine that had been lost during one of our moves. As Henry read the diary, he found records of feelings and frustrations I had never shared with him. The diary revealed aspects of my life and our relationship that I had kept to myself. Reading the diary brought a new understanding to Henry and helped clarify some of the underlying issues in our relationship. Henry told me how the discovery of the diary changed his perspective. He realized that the problems weren't just about the betrayal but about a lack of communication and mutual understanding. This realization helped further strengthen our commitment to working together and resolving our issues. With this new understanding and a desire to improve our communication, Henry and I began a new chapter in our relationship. The betrayal, though painful, served as a starting point for a deeper understanding between us. The garden, which had been the backdrop for so many ups and downs, became a symbol of our renewal. Henry and I learned to appreciate the importance of honesty and communication. Our relationship grew stronger and more mindful, and the garden flourished as a reflection of our journey. Peter, with the lessons he had learned, moved forward on his own personal journey. Although our romance had ended, the experience left us all with a new perspective on desire and the complexities of relationships.